50 leftist shower thoughts. Let's see how quickly I can do them in 3, 2, 1. Marriage is leftist. Marriage isn't natural. Marriage is not a result of biology. Marriage is a social construct. It's not instinctual. It's a creation of social engineering. Evolution. Evolution is a leftist concept thought up by a leftist man, Charles Darwin, who was a Whig, which at the time was on the left wing, very progressive man, and it's about change over time. If you want the definition of what leftism is, it's about overthrowing old orders and bringing in the new. So when the Olympians overthrow Titans, that's leftism. When the Asir overthrow the giants, that's leftism. Nurture over nature. Right-wing people like to say nature is everything, genes are everything. We're talking about animals that don't have linguistic mimetic structures. Yeah, your genetics, your hardwiring determines everything about your behavior. There's very little that you can learn. Once you start getting to the level of like chimpanzees, then with training, incentives, teaching, we can get chimpanzees to play games. We can get them to learn sign language, but still they're pretty limited. Once you're talking about human IQ, once you're talking about 80, 90, 100 IQ, the variance in a person's life outcomes become very unpredictable. When you look at a graph comparing like SAT scores or something, which is a heuristic similar to an IQ test, and you compare that to life outcomes in terms of income, people who are very dumb, yeah, they tend to make less income. You know, there is a correlation, what is it, 0.6 or something, but it's not deterministic. People who are very stupid can make a lot of money, and people who are very smart can make no money at all. When we talk about nature versus nurture, absolutely relevant when we're comparing animals to humans. But when we're talking about humans, and specifically we're talking about your nurture is really going to be a much stronger predictor of life outcomes than just purely genetics. Someone who is extremely smart but had abusive parents, or take the extreme example, someone who was raised by wolves in the forest, is obviously going to have less predictable outcomes as a result of their genetics than by their environment. On the other hand, if you take someone who's really mediocre, not very intelligent, didn't do well in school, was maybe a C student or even worse, but they're extremely passionate about something, they just pursue it endlessly. Look at the internet, look at meme culture, look at how you make money on the internet. You make money on the internet, which is starting to be the only way to make money. You make it by just pursuing things endlessly. Go on YouTube and look up some of the most viewed meme videos that people make thousands of dollars off these things, just passive income. What are these meme videos? It's videos that you steal from other people and repurpose as your own. It's videos where they take all the lyrics in the song and they put them in alphabetical order. That doesn't take any intelligence whatsoever. It just takes hard work, passion, determination, and you can make a lot more money than someone who's a brilliant math student. They spend their time playing video games, or they spend their time doing something that doesn't make a lot of money. So money is, of course, symbolic here. It could be anything that you're pursuing, whether it's athletics or physical growth or personal development or sociality or spirituality. You don't actually have to be that intelligent to excel in any of these fields. Of course, intelligence doesn't hurt, but the idea that nature is more important than nurture, not necessarily true, and so we'll give a point to the left. Jesus was a leftist. Jesus challenged both the Roman and Jewish authorities of the time on the basis of the spirit of logos, and the truth should be valued above tradition and ritual. Meritocracy is a point for the left, whereas the right wing has traditionally believed power should be distributed on the basis of your bloodline, who your ancestors were, or physical strength, brutality. The left looks at a full spectrum of merit. The left, again, is looking at changing environments and ecologies in which, you know, in one season or in one age, yeah, physical strength might be important, but we've now moved beyond that. And as things continue to change, there are going to be different talents and there are going to be different attributes of humanity. Continuously reorder the deck and make it so that you don't get these bloodlines, you don't get these people who are just inheriting power. The left is against that, and so they are pro-meritocracy. Centralization. The left is all about urbanism, monotheism, the French Revolution. What do these have in common? They're an intense period or process of centralization. So that is something that the left is big on. We've talked about nationalism as a historical movement. I believe it was a real historical movement. I don't think the word nationalism is meaningless, like some people want to make it out to mean anything that they want it to mean. It has a particular meaning, and when it did arise in Europe, it was a leftist idea. All the key figures there were leftists. Cancel culture is bad. The leftist response is every culture is cancel culture. You cannot find a culture on the face of the planet that does not cancel certain people or certain behavior or certain ways of thinking. Even the most primitive tribes person living out as far from technology as possible, these people still have a cancel culture. If you disrespect the elders, you disrespect the tradition, you disrespect the mores of that tribal society, they will cancel you. And they'll probably do worse than try to get you fired from your job. They'll probably, cut your head off or something. So free speech always has its limits. Of course, free speech is a leftist concept. It's part of meritocracy. But on the other hand, the idea that the left is unique in its intolerance, it's unique in cancel culture. We might disagree with this particular cancel culture. Just because we accept that cancel culture is a facet of every human society doesn't mean that we have to respect every single instantiation of it. I think people should be canceled for being evil. I don't think they should be canceled for speaking up for the truth. But still, just attacking cancel culture for the sake of attacking cancel culture, saying that shame, you can never shame people. The idea that we can have absolute free speech, that's a lie. We should push free speech as far as we can, but there's got to be some equilibrium where we reach a certain amount of freedom, but then we're also having some kind of unity and centralization and agreement. We have a common moral language that we can agree on. So we have to come to some midpoint, and saying just we shouldn't have any limits at all, no taboos. That is a CIA right-wing operation. That is Gloria Steinem's CIA agent talk. The idea that free speech is absolute. It's ridiculous, and it's something you see from right-wing freak weirdos on the internet. Not everything on the left is the Soviet Union. So people want to pigeonhole the left and say the leftist tradition is just the USSR. There's nothing outside of it. Everything leads to the gulags. It's just gulags as far as the eye can see. That's just not true. The warrior class of the Soviet Union was dominant. The Soviet Union was mostly run by bureaucrats and the generals, and the military had a huge influence in the Soviet Union, and that really characterized the way that the Soviet Union enforced rules and its culture and its governance. And so you had firing squads, and you had gulags, you had secret police. If you look at the so-called left today, and I do differentiate between what I consider to be the billionaire left as a sort of phony left, other forms of leftism, but if you look at the supposed left today, the left doesn't use firing squads and gulags and secret police. They basically use cat ladies and porn and social media and cultural osmosis. They effeminize people. They make people into consumers. They have an army of professors and blue checks and bureaucrats. They're accomplishing similar types of cultural control, but they're not doing it in a physically violent way. They're socializing people, and they're using mechanisms of social control. So another good example, following the tradition of the USSR, is North Korea, specifically, again, because North Korea, the military is so important and powerful, the warrior class has a huge influence there, and so that characterizes the way they think. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and so to North Koreans, they say, well, if we have a problem, we shoot somebody, we put somebody in a prison. The very physicalist concepts, that society of control is still in this very physical state. The idea that that's the only mechanism of control, and that's what the left inevitably leads to, is not really conducting a class analysis. Equality. So entrenched hierarchies always degenerate. The idea that you can have a special group of people making all the decisions and their descendants in perpetuity should always rule without any kinds of checks or balances, without any kind of testing. It always degenerates. It always ends up with genetic deformities, not even because of inbreeding, but just because those entrenched hierarchies will always grow weak. And it's not even just a genetic thing. That's just a metaphor really for the quicker process, which is mimetic degeneration, that when people are born into wealth and power, they become lazy. The first generation immigrants are not the same as the second generation. We know that the people who rise to power are not the same people who are born into power. It's a different mindset, it's a different mentality. People who had to strive to get where they are versus people who are born with a silver spoon. And so that is not a very robust system. If you have some kind of master signifier like God or the state, there is a kind of equality before the law, an equality before God. This is a leftist concept. Language, you could say, is a kind of a master signifier. We can't just change the language. We have to all sort of accept the authority of the language. This is really the only way we can communicate. We have to have some kind of baseline of authority here. Everyone is special. This is part of Western individualism. It is not a descriptive statement. It is prescriptive. It is saying that everyone should be special. You should not merely be a consumer. You should not merely do what everyone else is doing. You should not, as I said before, you should not just steal memes and repost them on Instagram to get money. You should create your own content. This is a moral prescription. You should be special. You should be different. Obviously, this can get ridiculous if you say, well, I'm going to be special, but I'm not going to do it according to any morality. I'm going to be special by, you say it's bad to eat poop. Okay, that's how I'm going to be special. You can take it in an absolute sense and totally ignore every other context. Taking this drive towards specialization or uniqueness is actually the mother of invention and technology and advancement. So that is a good point for the left. Speech is violent. Random violence like car crashes are not threatening to a social organism. What is threatening to a social organism is coordinated violence, and the only way to coordinate violence is through speech. And so ultimately, the real threats of violence to a society are never without speech, right? Speech is the fundamental basis for all coordinated violence. When the left says speech is inherently violent or hate speech is inherently violent, they do have a good point. Silence is violence. If something bad is happening and you don't speak out against it, you are complicit in it. That is another good point for the left. Immigrants assimilate. Someone who's like an Iranian American, they live in Los Angeles, they watch Marvel movies, they post about BLM, they go to pride parades every year. They don't have a lot in common with the people of their home country. America is fundamentally progressive, right, on all these social issues. The main point here is, do immigrants assimilate or not? Whatever I think about these individual issues, and we'll get into some issues at the end of the video, when immigrants come here, they vote for Democrats because Democrats are the morally dominant party. Republicans do not have any moral authority. If you are an immigrant, you're like a child. Children accept authority. And authority says BLM, Pride Month, Marvel movies. And so what do children do? They abide by those things. When immigrants come here, they abide by the authority. Immigrants don't come here and rebel against authority. They accept authority. Authority comes from Hollywood. So you might say that's a bad authority, that's not real leftism, whatever. We could get into those details. But the fact is that immigrants are assimilating. They are respecting the authority of American culture. If American culture was saying something completely different, if we had some kind of, Christian theocracy, you would see much different behavior from immigrants, which is a point I've been making for a long time, and it's a point that ultimately agrees with the left. Alienation is real. This is something the left has been saying since Marx, if not prior, and the right likes to ignore it. The right likes to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just make friends and give them a firm handshake and just ask the girl out on a date. Things aren't that simple. Sociality comes from a social context. It is not something that individuals can force down other people's throats. It comes from a wider culture. When these boomers and right-wing people say, oh, well, just don't be alienated, that is not our choice to make. We can make choices that try to create subcultures that are facilitating sociality and ameliorating alienation. And I'm not saying the situation is useless or that we should do nothing. It would be like if you're walking around in a restaurant where everyone is smoking cigarettes, you're going to get smoke in your lungs. Could you do things like wear a mask or cover your face with your mouth or with your shirt or something? Like, there are things you can do to help alienation, but fundamentally, alienation is real, and people who feel alienation are not just weak snowflakes or something like that. That is normal. That is the everyday average experience. And if you don't feel that because you're part of ethno-religion or you're part of a very tight-knit rural community, good on you. That is awesome, and I am happy for that, and I think more people should be able to experience that if they want to, rather than being forced into alienation. But alienation is not fake. It's not just people are crying fake crocodile tears. It's something real, and that's a point for the left. America has a mental health crisis. Mental health crisis, it's a real thing. Again, very similar to the problem of alienation, and a lot of times synonymous and really the same thing. The alienation that people feel is not fake. The mental illness that people feel is not fake. And the question is, where does responsibility lie? What are the causes of mental illness? That's a deeper discussion at play. Is it because of decisions by the government? Is it because of the way the economy is run? Is it because of genetic factors? Is it because of selection pressures? Is it because of our diet? Is it because of our exercise? Is it because of our lifestyle? Who decides these things? Who came up with the food pyramid? Why do we have desk jobs? Why do people drive their cars everywhere? Why don't we have football clubs? Like, what is going on? Those are deeper questions, but the fact is we have a mental health crisis, and it should be addressed. If you care about people, if you care about yourself, if you just hide away and you say, well, I'm too mentally tough, I don't know what mental illness is, all these crazy snowflakes, I say let them die. You can say that with a very libertarian right-wing attitude, and ultimately those people are going to come for you whether you like it or not. So you can try to help the situation, or you can be burnt in the fire. No one is immune. We are all connected in one way or another. Education is important. This is something that the right wing likes to pretend, there's leftist schools, who cares about them? Every single change and revolution that's ever happened has happened because people have ascended an institution and they've come out the other end. Jesus didn't just grow up and say, these rabbis don't know anything. I don't care what they think. No, he studied Torah. He studied the ways of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He knew scripture like the back of his hand. He understood the established Jewish institutions. That was the only way he could actually come and create change. Martin Luther, very similar, was trained as a Catholic priest. He knew everything a Catholic priest knew. He knew the catechism. He knew canon law. When he came to make change, he had something to stand on. He said, I know your system. I know how this works. And you have deep flaws that you are refusing to confront. If you're Catholic, you don't like what Martin Luther tried to do. But what I'm saying is that if you don't like the direction society is going in, just poo-pooing the mainstream academia and saying education is stupid and it's all evil and whatever, that is not going to create effective change at the end of the day. Hiding away and pretending everything is not actually happening as it is not going to change things. A great example, the Germans and the Romans. The Germans supposedly invaded Rome, did not invade Rome at all. They were invited in by their cousins who controlled the military. The German tribes, people like to talk about the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, but they don't like to talk about the fact that Arminius was trained as a Roman soldier. He knew all the Roman tactics because he had advanced through the Roman military. It is because the Germanic tribes were literally Roman, like they knew the Roman Empire, they controlled the Roman military essentially. They ascended through the institutions of Rome, and that's why they were able to take over Rome. It wasn't by being the opposite of the Romans or saying, Roman tactics and strategy, that's all ridiculous. No, they were wearing Roman armor, they were using Roman strategies, they integrated into Rome, and when they took over, they tried to reinstitute Roman law, maybe sometimes ineffectively. It was a tough time for the Great Migrations and those. You have to work through existing institutions if you really want to cause change. That's pretty much how every change, revolution, reform in history has happened. Liberal arts rule over STEM. Right-wingers all the time love to say that engineering is the best and math is a hard science and the soft humanities are evil and stupid and we must defund them. That is why the right wing always loses, because ultimately, what is the most powerful force in society? It's not the ability to tinker around with technology. In fact, technology comes from a prior spirit. Technology doesn't whisk itself into existence just because you have a high enough IQ. Technology comes about because of of a will. Technology comes out because of a want. Technology comes about because of a desire, and a systematized desire, not a random, disorganized, oh, I think I'm gonna solve some math problems today. No. That Faustian spirit that created modern science and mathematics as we know it, those people who are just obsessed with these engineering and abstract problems, they did so because they grew up fundamentally surrounded by philosophy, religion, art, and culture that inform the way they think. That is what comes first. When you have those priors, then you can get the latter. Then you can get all this cool technology. But this remains the case even today, now that we have the technology. If you want to have power in society, you don't want to be the engineer. Look at the military. The military is all about solving practical, real, pragmatic problems. The people who control the military are not the ones with the guns. The people who control the military are not the military engineers or the guys working on the planes and creating the next jet fighter or whatever. Those guys are really smart and they are important, but they don't direct and make the decisions of how we use our military. Are we going to bomb this country? Are we going to withdraw? Are we going to protect our southern border? What are we going to do with the military? That's what really matters at the end of the day. And the people who make those decisions are lawyers, political science majors, social science and humanities. Those are the people who ultimately make the decisions. So if you want to change the world, that's really where you have to do it. If you just become a mathematician or an engineer, you're going to become a tool for people who are going into the humanities and the arts. Everything should be political. This is something the left says all the time, and it's something the right wing refuses to acknowledge and accept as a reality of our day. Imagine the Romans saying, why does everything need to be religious? Why can't we all just be Roman citizens, right? Why do we have to talk about Christian versus pagan, pagan versus Christian? Why can't we're all Roman citizens. Why can't we all just get along? Why does everything have to be political? This is the last gasp of a dying breed, right? When people say, why do we have to argue all the time? Can't we just get along? This is a loser mentality, right? If you want to have power, you push your agenda, you push your narrative. Yes, everything is political. If that's tiring and exhausting for you, maybe you're on the losing side of history. Art serves a function. Again, the right wing loves to discredit art, say art is useless, to say people who are artists, it's the deadbeat artist, the starving artist. They're just there, heads in the clouds. You need to work on practical problems. Real men with guns and wrenches, and they work on cars, is just a variation of the liberal arts versus STEM. But art is moralizing. Art gives us meaning for life. Art gets us out of bed in the morning. Art creates a mythic structure that unites us, allows us to cooperate, gives us goals, gives us a story of who we are, who we should be. It takes things that would be banal and it makes them divine, right? Art is the fundamental fabric of society. Hollywood movies today, back to Cleopatra and the ancient Egyptians, or even cave paintings and dances we have no record of. Sexuality is violent. This is a feminist point that the right wing likes to, back to the monogamy statement, the right wing likes to say like, if a feminist says sex is inherently violent, there's a reaction of like, oh, that's perverse, oh, that's political, you're a feminist, you have an agenda. Why can't it just be like a Disney movie? Why can't, the man and the woman, they just, they kiss each other and then the curtains flutter in the background, the camera pans away to the ocean waves or something. Can it just be, peaceful? But there's a conflict going on, right? There's dominance, there's submission, all of the elements of warfare, all the elements of competition that we see in sports, that we see in martial arts, right? Those psychological aspects are there in sexuality. Not just the sex act itself, but the act of pursuing the predator-prey relationship. All that is there. We see it in animals, of course, and it's part of human nature. So whether we like it or not, it is violent, and therefore it's a kind of Pandora's box. It's something that should be regulated, right? It's something, therefore, that's dangerous. And this is kind of a distinction between first, second, third wave feminists, right? So you could say there's disagreements on the left about this, but It is an interesting point, and it's a point for the left. Gender is a social construct. Again, like monogamy, gender is not something that is purely instinctual. It does have a biological basis. Obviously, the Y chromosome, that's something we can clearly look to and say, look, it's in the genes. But if you give men estrogen hormones, they will act differently. If you give women testosterone, they'll act differently. And as it turns out, our levels of estrogen and testosterone are not uniform across the human species. As I referred to before, nature versus nurture. Yeah, IQ is important to a certain extent, but it doesn't determine everything. Your nature in terms of how much hormones you have in your body, a lot of that is genetic. However, a lot of it is environmentally impacted. The diet that you have, whether or not you exercise, how often you're having sex, if you're living a lifestyle full of failure, if you're living a lifestyle full of confidence. The way your psychology actually changes your hormones. We have tested that if you have exactly the same material conditions, but you call a man a loser and you make fun of him, you bring social pressure against him, you put him in an adverse political environment, all types of things lower men's testosterone, and it changes the way that they think, and it changes the way they act. So there is a sociality to gender. Gender is a spectrum. You can become more masculine, you can become more feminine, you can become more androgynous, not merely as a result of material conditions, although those are important, but also as a result of mental conditions, you can become more masculine, more feminine. So there is a lot of social construction to gender, and we're seeing this. We're seeing women who are acting masculine and assertive and aggressive and just mean, and we're seeing men who are being compliant and weak and self-pitying and self-hating. Men who feel extremely emasculated, seek out extremely violent porn as a form of revenge fantasy because it's something that they feel so imprisoned by their effeminization that they have to live out this like rape fantasy. And, you know, feminists do the same thing. It's when people are actually active, assertive, aggressive in their lives, and tend to be, you know, in a sense more healthy, that these kind of fantasies are not as prevalent. This kind of ties into the concept of the transgender movement. Priests, the priest class, back to the early shamans, have always been a little bit sexually ambiguous. Their gender has always been something that's sort of fluid and weird and some kind of outside. You know, we talked about alpha males, beta males. These are kind of like gamma males. You know, these are guys who are not competing sexually. They're not winners, they're not losers, but they're somehow outside the social context. These people are very old. The Sumerian Gala, the Bisu, the Hydra, the Mugawe, the Enaries. You know, there are all kinds of examples going back. The Kouros boy of Greek statues, all kinds of gendered ambiguities. The biological masculinity that we think about, this should probably be a whole separate video because I was talking to somebody on Twitter about this, are the way that we define masculinity. If we simply define it in this murderous, psychopathic, kill and fornicate, you could say that's natural, right? You could say that's the right-wing man. Well, that's not really what makes a successful society. That's not really competitive in this technological world. The priest class, through its sexual ambiguity, through its rejection of this alpha-beta dichotomy, they inject altruism and a concept of honor. That's ultimately where it comes from into men, and it creates a normative masculinity, right? A masculinity that's controlled by norms, not just bloodlust and sexual lust. But now we have monogamy, right? Now we have altruism. Now we have self-sacrifice. Now we have a concept of, you know, the tribe of the nation or whatever that comes in and allows that masculinity to be directed and filtered. And the people who do that, the priests who do that, are not themselves necessarily the animal masculine, but they are defining what masculinity is. This ties into the transgender concept. When people say that trans women are women, it's not some kind of delusion or ignorance, right? It's not some kind of low IQ or someone is, when people advocate for this. Now, people who are in a state of gender dysphoria, that's another question. But when people advocate that we have to respect trans rights, a kind of priestly attack. This is a priest class which is afraid of a warrior class, and is trying to create normative values in order to restrain that warrior class. It's a process that's been going on for a long time. So it's important to understand that it's not merely like an accident, right? There's a long precedence for this going back to ancient history. It's something we should understand. Going into subjectivity versus objectivity, there's a neat little meme, the green needle versus brainstorm. You got to look it up. And you listen to it, and it still is incredible to me. The way it works, just to give a spoiler, you can pause the video and go look up green needle versus brainstorm. But once you come back after you've paused the video, and you know what, probably take a water break, right? It's probably a good time to just take a water break. So everyone pause the video. We're going to promote healthy attitudes, healthy habits. Everybody drink up. I hope you took that water break. If you didn't, you got to take the water break. You got to become an excellent subscriber and drink the water. It tastes so nice, I drank it twice. Green needle versus brainstorm. Now that you've watched that and you've come back, it's amazing because one of the phrases is at a higher pitch, the other is at a lower pitch. And you can go back and forth and be like, I swear it says green needle. And then I swear it says brainstorm. And what's going on? It is subjective. It is perception. It's part of why art is so important. Things are not... The idea of objective truth, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. But what I'm saying is that subjectivity in our perception is extremely important. It's not something that should be ignored. And the idea that we can all come to agreement on topics without art, without moralization, without poetry, without rhetoric, the idea that we can come together and have language and agreement without those things, it's just not going to work. Even if there is an objective truth that we're trying to refer to, we still need to mediate, we still need to get there through subjective methods. Language is leftist. So language is a memetic structure, and memetics is leftist because memetics changes over time. Literacy, furthermore, is leftist. Pre-literate societies pass down stories virtually unchanged over time for countless generations. Literacy erodes this memory in favor of dynamism. In a literate society, you don't see people who are just reciting the Iliad word by word. This is what you get in pre-literate societies. They literally will have like the one story of the tribe, and it'll be really long, and it'll take like 4 hours to say or whatever, and it's in 3 different parts, and the old men will memorize it, and that's all they have. Once you have literacy, you basically offload or offshore our need for memory into these texts, and it allows for a huge explosion of human consciousness and human myth and thought, and allows us to see a new pace of innovation. Constitutions are leftist. Of course, literacy, we just talked about the myth of a society. Constitutions are the laws of a society. When you start writing down the laws into a constitution, again, this is, people would think, oh, well, that means like you're making everything really right-wing, right? Because you're forcing everyone to abide by this law, and it's very clear. But actually, constitutions are what allow for change to happen. See, if you don't have a constitution, everything is according to common law, established law, case law. We can study what law was like before constitutions. It didn't change very much. Once a law is written down in a constitution, it becomes open to scrutiny, right? When something's written down, it becomes desacralized. When something is only spoken, it has a spoken power. It actually has a stronger spirit. When something's written down, it actually neuters it, and it allows it to be questioned, and that allows it to be eroded and changed over time. Radio is leftist. Radio as a mechanism of communication has instituted huge social sweeping changes. What happened to the music industry, if you listen to music pre-radio, music post-radio, it is a huge revolution in terms of the popular music that people listen to. Prior to the radio, people pretty much listened to folk music. That was the only genre. There was, I guess, classical music was the music of the aristocracy, and folk music was the music of the peasantry, and that's all there was for hundreds of years, and it changed very, very little. Once you got the radio, all of a sudden you get huge change. Television is leftist, very similar. The types of plays that people watched, right? Shakespeare was popular for hundreds of years. People are still performing Shakespeare, watching Shakespeare for hundreds of years. Then the TV comes along, and now We can't even watch, if you watch a show that's over 10 years old, it's like, why are you watching that old show? Don't you know the newest Game of Thrones? Of course, now Game of Thrones is old. You have to watch the newest episode of whatever. And people are only paying attention to the new. The internet is leftist. The internet, again, is a force of change, is almost incomparable to these other mediums of technology, because it takes things that are 5 minutes old and it says, oh, that's a boring meme. We need the new cutting edge. Obvious downside of this is you're just pursuing fashion. And if you're just focused on the form and the style rather than the substance, become a situation where people are just focused on superficialities rather than investigating the deepness. So there's a layered critique of what I'm saying here. But at least on the surface, all of these things are pretty leftist. Science is leftist. Science is leftist, and I'm sure you listen to the radio, you watch TV, you use the internet, and you use science, and it's leftist. It's a force for change. Technology is leftist, right? By extension, technology, technics, as Heidegger says, is the force that predates technology, that creates technology. This is the force for change. This is Parmenides versus Heraclitus. Right? This is the destruction of the old order by the new. Faustianism. Central to our Faustian civilization is left-wing, the seeking the new, seeking infinite space, not being satisfied with the limitations of the old. The frontal lobe is leftist. If you want to be a real right-winger, you have to return to monkey. You have to be a primitive, monkey. I like to feed and fornicate and sleep and be monkey. If you want to do that, you're going to have a frontal lobotomy, because the frontal lobe is what allows us to have leftism. It allows us to have mimetics. It allows us to have change. Government is leftist. If you don't have a government, what do you have? You have decentralized tribal societies. You have cults. You have clans. You have extended family structures, essentially. That's the right wing. The right wing is a world full of roaming, Paleolithic tribes. Government is what centralizes. It specializes. That is what leftism is. Morality is leftist. Prior to morality, you just have instincts. You just have feelings. You just have a competing array of monkey politics. There's a monkey alpha male, and then another monkey alpha male comes along, and they fight with each other and establish dominance hierarchies. So it's not to say that monkeys don't have rules, but morality as a mimetic code that is transmitted not primarily through violence, right? It's enforced through violence at the margins, but you don't teach kids morality unless you're a certain community of Americans for whom domestic violence is common and frequent. If you're part of mainstream American culture, you don't teach your kids to share by hitting them, right? You teach them through stories and morality. So whereas primitive tribal hierarchies are determined frequently by physical violence, as well as through sexuality, sexual socialization, and like bonobos. Morality for humans is something that's spoken, and it is leftist. It is not determined by the pragmatic physicality of the moment. It's determined by a priest class. Altruism is leftist. Altruism is something that allows us to create collectives when we identify people as friends, right? Not relatives, not lovers. We're not connected through blood. We're not connected through sex. We're connected because we love our common man. We love strangers. This is what allows for cities to be functional. When people can be altruistic, when you bump into somebody on the subway and you say, oh, sorry, didn't mean to bump into you, right? That kind of altruism is necessary to keep things together. Eugenics is leftist, or artificial selection, if you want to call that. Of course, father of eugenics would be Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin. Both of them were leftists for their time. They were both Whigs. Yeah, the whole concept of artificial selection, rather than just letting nature rule everything, you're taking ideas in your head and you're saying, this is what I want humanity to look like. Let's let mimetics rule over genetics rather than subjugating mimetics to genetics. Clocks are leftist. Clocks divide up the time. You can't just sleep whenever you feel like it. Now there's mimetic control. There is a centralization, a standardization. Time is the same everywhere. Clocks are regulation. And that leads into units are leftist, and moreover, math is leftist. Math is a series of symbols and abstractions. It's not just base instincts. It's not the immediacy of the Heideggerian moment, right? It is universal principles that are communicated through abstraction. Makeup is leftist, and fashion is leftist. Makeup is a social signal. It is an art form, really. I mean, women who are really good at makeup, that actually takes artistic talent. I mean, you can go buy the materials yourself and try to dress yourself up or whatever. It actually takes talent, takes skill, and so it's a display of a kind of cognitive capacity for pattern seeking and hand-eye coordination. Fashion is something that changes day to day. The right-winger would like to be naked or wearing a loincloth or something, or just a three-piece suit. Never wants to change. Leftists are evolutionary. They're always changing. They're always trying to signal some kind of adaptive openness, and so they're basically the source of all fashion. Peacocks are leftists. Peacocks as an animal species. They're always signaling to each other. The tail is not practical. It's not pragmatic at all. Be thrown out of engineering school with that tail, but it's a signal that shows that the peacock has the ability to bear a load, and it has good genetic fitness. It can create these patterns, and peacocks are pattern-seeking creatures. They love those big tails, and I love them too. Bees are leftists. They are a collective, centralized, specialized species, as well as ants. They have the queen, and they have the workers, and they have the drones, and they all work together altruistically, self-sacrificing. They're not as individual wolves going out and trying to make it on their own. They're working together. They have an extreme morality to that. They all follow and you can say it's instinctive in their case, rather than humans, it's mimetic. Aliens are leftists. The whole concept of aliens, they are out of this world. They are different from us, and they have amazing technology, and they can time travel, and they can invade, and they can come in. Representation that we have of foreignness, of something different to ourselves, of something more advanced than ourselves. And aliens are very open, right? Aliens, if they were right-wing primitivists, they would just come and kill us all, right? We'd already be dead. If there was an advanced alien species, we'd all be dead. But aliens are so altruistic, kind, nice. They're just coming to investigate. They want to learn about this. They're curious. God is a leftist. God is an active creator. He's always coming up with new things. When you worship him, you could say that's a passive submission. Religion, in that sense, sometimes can become right-wing. Although, let's look at the way that religion is left-wing. You are respecting norms, right? So, memetics, the priest class, there is a suppression of violence and a worship of a central divinity. There's a lot of capacity for leftism, especially in monotheism. I had something about an uncut lawn here. Is a cut lawn, is that orderly and therefore right-wing and standardized? Is it egalitarian? Is it collectivist? I couldn't figure out. Post in the comments below if you think a well-cut lawn is left-wing or right-wing. I couldn't quite decide. You are a leftist. If you made it this far through the list, you at least found one thing where you were like, yeah, I guess I am starting to pick up the trend here of the way that he's using these words, right-wing and left-wing. And he made me think of one of these things, and I was like, yeah, maybe that is kind of left-wing. And maybe I'm not a 100% right-wing person. If you had that thought at all, congratulations, you're at least partially a leftist, and now we're in the same boat together. And if you didn't, you're canceled, okay? But left-wing Christianity is something I had as a bonus here. Christianity, I mentioned before, has concepts of equality, meritocracy, the destruction of an unjust hierarchy, rejection of the anarchism of the individual, because you have to embrace the collective of the body of Christ. You've got the concept of the Faustian infinity of God. You're never settling for good enough. We're never good enough. We're never going to reach Jesus. Or we're always striving for that. The concept of something from nothing that we get in Christianity is antithetical to the right-wing materialist concept of equivalent exchange, and the fact that you can move mountains with mustard seeds. We are going to take a look at some specific policy stuff now. This was something I found on Twitter, and we're not even an hour in, so I feel that I'm doing pretty good. We've got $15 minimum wage, Sanders, Biden, Trump. So here's the problem with raising the minimum wage is that inflation in America is out of control. And not only is inflation out of control, but cost of living is out of control. The cost of college is out of control. The cost of housing is out of control. The cost of childcare is out of control. All of this is out of control. And so if you're just saying, oh, let's have a $15 minimum wage, you're actually not solving those underlying problems. I would rather have the minimum wage decreased or abolished if we could lower cost of living, if we could reduce foreign competition for American jobs, if we could do any of these things to lower the cost of college, lower the cost of education. I mean, if you can live for free, right? If we lived in some Soviet system where housing is free, healthcare is free, all these things are free, you don't actually need a lot of money. If the necessities of life, and again, it's not about living or dying, it's about things that people, we decide these are the standards that people should have in order to express their full potential. Not giving people golden toilet seats or some kind of Ted Cruz straw man, but saying like, yeah, people have the right to housing, people have the right to food, people have the right to education, right? Not golden toilet seats, not Ferraris, not consumer items, but things that really improve people's lives and make the country better. If we guaranteed those things or supported working families more in those things, you wouldn't need to move the minimum wage. I think the minimum wage is a really flimsy issue to support. It really doesn't get at the systematic problems in American society. I don't care if the minimum wage is $150. I don't care if it's $1 million an hour, right? If we don't solve the underlying trends in terms of the cost of education, cost of living, cost of childcare, all those things, it doesn't matter how high the minimum wage goes. So I think it's a fake, false issue. Much like, environment. We're going to talk about CO2, but we're not going to talk about the xenoestrogens in the plastic. Paid family leave. Okay, this is another one where it's essentially a gender issue. It's essentially a question of, do you want family structures or do you want some kind of, matriarchy or something like that? You have to think of the incentive structures in that. When you look at marriages that are happy or just relationships that are happy, women are consistently happier in relationships where men make more money. So you can say that's a result of patriarchy. You can say the result of whatever that is. You can say you hate it, you wish it wasn't true, but it is true. So if you want women to be happier and if you, as a result, want men to be happier, you would have to stop giving women free money. You would have to say, at the very least, we're not going to give women free stuff from the government anymore, because that's actually making women less happy, and it's making men less happy, and it's destroying families, and it's making kids less happy, and it's making everybody less happy. So let's stop giving women free money. How about every time a married man has a kid, we cut his taxes or something, or we give him a bonus, or we give him paid family leave. The economic structures of paid family leave and of gender imbalances in the United States in general and all over the world are creating some perverse incentives. So Citizens United has to do with corporate lobbying. Do corporations have freedom of speech? Can they donate to political candidates? The problem with this, again, it's a very flimsy issue because before Citizens United and after Citizens United, we know corporate lobbies have huge influence and power. Additionally, when you look at the top donors to political parties, people like Adelson, people like Soros, people like, I guess prior to Trump, people like the Kushners, these are individual donations. They're not corporate donations. And so what you do, if we did theoretically ban all corporate donations, you would just be giving more power to Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and individual billionaires, which would actually concentrate power in their hands. I'm not saying it's really a better situation either way. Both situations have a lot of perverse incentives. But again, I don't think it's a huge important issue that there's going to be more power to the people if we stop Goldman Sachs from donating to political parties, because ultimately what happens is they donate to both sides. And if you ban the corporations, all you're doing is you're creating a different corporate competition. You're not eliminating it, because then, okay, well, the corporation can't donate, so we'll just have the CEO donate. I mean, there's always loopholes around this thing. You're not systematically attacking the problem, which is of the merchant class dominating politics, right? That's it, period. End of story. Money in politics equals merchant power. If you want to defeat merchant power or regulate it, you can't do that by saying, citizens united bad, corporations bad. Like, that's not going to do anything. You have to empower one of the other two classes, which is the warrior priest class. If you don't do that, nothing's going to happen. Abolish death penalty. This is, I guess, one I think I've talked about before. Death penalty. People die. If we believe that the end of a human life is the worst thing that is possible, it's worse than any crime. Think of the worst crime that could possibly be committed, and we have 100% certainty that someone's committed that crime. I think with the death penalty, there should be some kind of if you're going to say what's the strictest admittance of the death penalty that is possible, some kind of limit in terms of we have to know 100% that they're guilty. Like, we have to have DNA evidence, we have to have a confession of guilt, whatever. Like, you have to have some kind of after the fact, because the argument against the death penalty I hear is most convincing is the idea that innocent people get killed, which is not common, but if it happens, it's a tragedy. So to prevent that, I think there should be an additional layer of judicial review. People go in, and it shouldn't really be about the severity of the crime. If someone's on death row, I'm pretty confident the crime was bad enough. Also, the concept of keeping people in prisons their whole lives as not being cruel as opposed to just killing them. Especially in a lot of these cases, these people wish that the state would just kill them. They're like, look, I would rather be killed than rot in jail forever. So there's a lot of factors here. Also, the secularization of the society. The fact that people don't believe in a soul or an afterlife, or YOLO, it's the only one you get. That, I think, is part of the culture behind opposing the death penalty. Cocaine, prison sentencing. Cocaine's a pretty bad drug. It's actually not the worst. I would say opiates are worse than cocaine. Cocaine will give you a heart attack, but apparently it doesn't matter. Apparently Republicans feel the same way as Democrats, so not even one to care about here. Eliminate mandatory minimum sentences. We just have a situation where people who are judges are typically wealthy. If you're a judge, you probably make more than $100,000 a year. You probably live in a nice house. You've been a lawyer for a long time. Judges are pretty much just retired lawyers. Judges are basically like, in the education system, when a teacher has been teaching for 20 years, what happens? They become the principal. When a lawyer's been lawyering for 20 years, they become a judge. So these are people with a lot of money. They live in gated communities. They don't have to fear crime. The only time they fear crime is if they're like sentencing a gang member and they fear the gang is going to retaliate against them. That would be as if they used a harsh sentence. And so there's a perverse incentive now for judges to be soft and to be altruistic and to say, oh, I'm going to be the nice judge and I'm going to listen to your sob story and I'm going to let you go scot-free. And there's not a lot of punishment for judges being harsh. There's only punishment if judges are, let me put that the other way around. There's not a lot of punishment for judges being too lenient, and judges feel this pressure of, oh, I don't want to be too harsh, because if a judge is too harsh, then they're gonna be called racist or something. So I think minimum mandatory sentences do give judges an excuse of like, hey, I didn't want to sentence him, but that's the law. So maybe in some cases they're unreasonable, but when we look at the big picture, if we believe that the prison system is decreasing crime and that's a good thing, then probably something that has some utilitarian function. Eliminate private prisons. The whole issue of public versus private, we talked about gulags, right? So gulags were very public prisons. I don't think it ensures good prison quality. The issue with prisons, there's a lot of issues with prisons that we could go into. And I can't say everything that I'd like to in terms of how I think a better criminal justice, if people are acting badly and we want to get rid of them, maybe putting them in a cage is not the most effective way to do that. Maybe there's other solutions. But yeah, private prisons, I don't think eliminating that is going to make the country much better. The main issue I see with prisons and the legal system is the way it's being used politically by judges to eliminate their political opponents. I don't think private prisons are the vector of that. Against for-profit charter schools. So everybody, I guess that one doesn't matter. Free college, yes. 2-year free and no. And left is Sanders, Biden's in the middle, and Trump's on the right. So, yeah, I mean, 2 years free sounds reasonable. I guess I'm going with Biden. The good middle path. We'll try it out. We'll see if it works. College is a complicated thing because, like I said, there's a lot of benefits to it. It's very important. I don't think it should be ignored or written off. But it is very expensive, and if there was a way to make it free, the ultimate question is, do you control what's being taught there? If you control what's being taught there, then you're happy with it. And if you don't, then you're mad about it and you want to destroy it. But it's something that's got to be worked through. Student loan debt, forgive all, forgive in bankruptcy, no. Yes, student loan debt's another one of those. When we think about the distribution of wealth in society, we currently have a society in which old people are given a lot of financial benefits. And in terms of moving society forward and creating a dynamic society that's going to be competitive in the world, giving old people all the financial power isn't how you create a dynamic, forward-looking, successful society. And so in this case, I would say if we're just talking about young people who maybe they've made bad decisions, maybe they got a degree in basket weaving, I don't know, obviously every individual case. But in general, if you're talking, should we just keep letting boomers have all financial control in America, or should we also give young people some kind of compensation for what we've done for the elderly? I would side with being very lenient. Nuclear power, no, yes, no. Okay, apparently I'm with Biden on this one. I think nuclear power is cool. Obviously radiation is bad, but xenoestrogens are worse. So Paris Climate Accords, CO2, who cares? Like, I'm worried about plastic on the streets. I'm worried about mass immigration coming in and making everything dirty and gray. I'm worried about concrete jungles. Paris Climate Accords does not address that at all, so it can be thrown out the window. Pay farmers off on climate. Farmers are pretty corrupt. I'm not a huge fan of massive corporate farms. Small farmers are like a blip on the map, so I don't think in the big picture, I would rather not give farmers trillions of dollars. Citizenship for dreamers. I'm not a dreamer, so no. Voluntary buyback program. Nah. Universal background checks. Nah. Abortion rights. Nah. Insurance coverage. Insure people for accidents. If you get hit by a bus, free insurance for everybody. Otherwise, if you're fat, good luck. But free gym memberships as well. So we got to balance that one out. Limit out-of-pocket costs. Again, depends on what the issue is. If you got heart disease, get a gym membership. There's a lot I would do in terms of health and diet, but negotiate drug prices. Depends on what the drug is and what it's for. Capital gains tax. Yeah, let's tax the wealthy people. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.